Story 1. I live in Vermont, pretty close to the Canadian border, and my family owns a good chunk of a mountain behind our house. I've always loved hiking up our mountain and camping out, but after several instances of being far too close for comfort with coyotes and bears at night, I decided to build a small shack for camping in. I built it in my freshman year of high school, and it certainly was nothing to write home about. It was a log cabin made from only moose maple, which is sick for building with, and completely encased in roofing to prevent rain from blowing through the cracks between logs. That's the backstory. The camp became a pretty popular spot for my friends and me to hang out, shoot guns, and blow stuff up because it was 10 miles away from any significant settlement. While it was certainly liberating being in the middle of nowhere, we all knew it was on us to get to safety if any of us got injured up there. Anyways, I'll start with the story. I asked one of my close friends to go on a campout on a Friday night after school. We'd been friends since middle school, so he had been up there multiple times before. After hiking up and roasting some hot dogs on fire while listening to some chill music, it was dark. Whenever it gets dark on these campouts, you can always hear wildlife, I thought, running around the woods surrounding the fire. I always thought it was creepy, but after a long time with no bad encounters with wildlife, I felt pretty okay with the situation every night I was up there, and it more or less just became a neat occurrence while camping out. I always was armed with some sort of gun going up there for protection, so I never felt that scared. Anyways, after having our fill, we decided to go into the camp and get some sleep. In the camp, 10x12, there was one homemade bunk bed, some floor space and countertop, and a small wood cook stove. I took the top bunk and my friend took the bottom. We both fell asleep pretty quickly, but awoke simultaneously at what I would guess was around 1 a.m. to the sound of a church choir right outside the camp. It sounded like 30-40 people singing, and it was resonating inside my head. I could distinctly make out some Latin words, but I could never piece together what was being said. I turned down to my friend and asked if his phone was on, and he said it was dead. The creepiest part about this, after reflecting on it, was that we were perfectly calm. If anything, it was super soothing, and eventually we both fell asleep. In the morning, we both checked around the camp and saw no signs of anyone, let alone 40 people. We were 10 miles away from a town. To this day, I have no clue what happened, but I commonly refer to the singing as the angels because of how angelic it sounded. I think about it all the time, but it hasn't happened to me again since. I'm just glad I have someone to corroborate the story with, or else people would think I'm insane. Story 2. It's my mom's story, so her friend called her and was slightly hysterical that her house was haunted. My mom is a scientist and was very skeptical but agreed to come to check it out. The friend was adamant that either the house was haunted or she was going crazy, and in either case she needed help. My mom arrives at the friend's house and she begins showing my mom what she's seen. First, in the living room, there is a brass lamp that is shiny so you can see the reflection of the kitchen behind as you look at the lamp. She asks my mom to just watch the reflection in the lamp. My mother sees a shadowy man step out from behind the wall. She turns around, there's no one there. This phenomenon repeats itself several times. Next, they go into the friend's son's room, turn off the lights, close the door, but leave the hallway light on. As she's looking at the strip of light under the door, very clearly she sees the shadow of 2 feet step in front of the door. Open the door, no one is there. Again, this phenomenon repeats itself several times. Lastly, they go lay in the friend's bed. She fluffs up the comforter and it falls on top of their legs. Very clearly, you could see the indentation of someone sitting on top of the comforter. Fluff up the comforter again, and it happens again. All of these events would repeat themselves whenever she looked at them. My mom insists that she tried to investigate all of these events but could find no other explanation. The friend went to a medium psychic type soon after who told her it was her furniture that was haunted, not the house. The furniture was secondhand, bought at a garage sale. So she got rid of the furniture and the paranormal stuff stopped. Story 3. I used to work at a restaurant that had a garage door. It's a wall of windows that can be lifted like a garage door to create a faux patio. It was a pretty solid thing, and it rattles fiercely when you open or closes it. It looked out onto the street, which was usually quite busy. That night, I was finishing up closing duties, maybe 11 or so. The dishwasher and cooks are long gone. It's dark outside, so all I can see across the street are the lights from the opposing building, a restaurant too. I finish everything up, head into the back room, and start shutting off the lights. As I sign out and gather my stuff, I hear a rattling sound, like a fist knocking on a window, almost as if they were shaking the garage door. I poke my head out from the back room to look, expecting to see some drunk customer hoping for a late-night meal. But the second I look, the rattling stops. Nothing there. Weird. Must be the wind. Maybe a truck passing by and shaking the garage door. I turn back and grab my keys. Rattling fills the dining room once again. I turn on one of the main lights and step out, ready to tell whoever it is that we're closed. But once again, the rattling stops and nobody is there. All I see are the lights across the street and my annoyed expression reflected on me. No trucks or cars, no people or wind. I return to the back room to grab my stuff, turn off the light again, and get ready to get the hell out of there. And, you guessed it, the rattling starts again. This time, I say out loud, "I'm not doing this tonight. I'm tired. Just let me lock up and leave." It stops. I walk out of the back room, set the alarm, and open the back door that leads out into a dark parking lot at the back of the building. When I turn back to lock the door, I see a figure standing at the garage door. Needless to say, I got out of there as fast as I could. I know it was likely someone having a smoke. I know the rattling was probably just the wind, though I'd never heard it make that noise before, and never heard it again. And I know that the rattling stopping and starting like that was probably just an eerie coincidence. But sometimes I remember that the restaurant backed onto the city hall where an old jail sits just underground. Sometimes I remember how old that district is, and exactly what might have lived in these buildings before we moved in. And I'm glad I quit that job when I did. Story 4. I was staying with a group of friends rock climbing in Spain. Creepy Airbnb, lots of strange things happened while we were staying there. The creepiest was one morning we were getting ready for the day, packing food, and generally getting our shit together, and I went upstairs to grab something. As I was heading back downstairs, I walked past my friend's boyfriend on the landing, and saw him turn and go into his and my friend's room. I think I asked him something, but he didn't reply. I thought rude and headed downstairs. Walked into the kitchen and he was there sorting food out with my friend. Everyone swore he'd been downstairs the whole time. Plus there was only one staircase and it would have been impossible for him to overtake me and get to the kitchen before me without me noticing. I went back upstairs and checked their room, and there was no one up there but me. I've never experienced anything creepy or inexplicable before we stayed in that Airbnb, and I'd say I'm skeptical about supernatural paranormal stuff. But multiple things happened on that trip that spooked me. Story 5. About 10 years ago, I'd have been 24. I was still living with my parents. My bedroom was in the basement. One night, around 3 a.m., I was woken up to the sounds of a young child crying. It sounded like it was coming from just outside my window. I couldn't just look out the window because it was covered in ivy, so I quickly hopped out of bed to go help the kid. As I got closer to my bedroom door, I could hear the crying was actually on the other side of the door. I opened the door, no one is there, and the crying stopped. Spooked, I immediately jumped back in bed and the crying started again. Later that day at dinner, my family was sitting around the table and I brought up the experience I had. One of my sisters told a story about how when she was a kid she'd always leave her room at night to go sleep with my parents because she'd see a little girl walking out of her closet. As she left her room and got to my parents' door waiting to be let in, because the door was locked, she'd see the little girl walking up the stairs that were right there. After she told this story, my youngest sister looked scared and asked, "The little girl, is she wearing a pink nightgown with shoulder-length brunette hair?" Now my other sister was scared because that is exactly who she saw. My youngest sister told me how she had similar experiences with that little girl coming out of the closet at night or walking up the stairs at night. I'm convinced that something happened either in that house before we moved in or on that land that my parents' house was built on. Story 6. I was putting beef in the slow cooker because I wanted it done in the morning. It was late at night. I reached up to grab some seasonings and heard creaking. I told my kids to get in bed. I see something out of my peripheral vision, and there was nobody but a head of a bald, pale man floating 312, maybe 4 feet off the ground in the middle of the floor. Its face kept looking as if it was sad, or like it was begging. It locked eyes with me. I fucking froze. I had a darker wall with a coat rack with my husband's work jackets so it stood out like a store thumb. I looked away thinking it was my imagination, but when I looked back it was still there, so I ran out the back door, because I'd have to pass it to get upstairs with my husband and kids. I ended up calling him on my phone to come to walk me in. I was wide awake, not sleepy, not out of it, on no medication. I have no reason to see that ever. Story 7. Scariest was probably when I was around 11, 12. Went to a friend's house to hang out and found her sitting outside her house, freaking out, saying a mirror kept trying to kill her. Once she calms down a little bit, she took me up to her room and said, "Watch this." She had this big square mirror on the top of her dresser, leaning back against the wall. She bends over like she is going to open the bottom drawer and get something out of it. And I watch this square mirror stand up on its own until it's not leaning on the wall, but standing upright on its edge, and then it rolls as best a square can, until it has rolled off the dresser and fallen to the ground, missing my friend's head by maybe half an inch. Mirror didn't break when it hit the ground. She gave me this "you saw it, right? Look," but the mirror back up on the dresser and we both left. I believe she had her mom move the mirror out of her room after that, and as far as I know, nothing creepy like that happened again after that day, but it was unsettling to see. On a lighter note, my family had what we believe was the ghost of a little girl living with us for several years in a house we rented in TN. Never creepy, outside of just normal ghost girl unsettling. We would catch glimpses of her out of the corner of our eye. My wife and I would feel her climb up into bed with us to snuggle at night like little kids are wont to do. One of us would be up late at night and see the kid's computer chair swivel to face the computer and the computer boot up and start loading the kids' play or educational sites. One of the neatest experiences was when we got our first cat. She was a neighborhood stray, and we took her in. The entire family was in the living room at the front of the house, just being chill and letting her explore her new environment. She meanders down the hall to the back of the house, and we all hear, clear as day, a delighted little girl giggle and kitty-wide from down the hall. We moved away from that house about 7 years ago now. I still think about it and hope whoever is living there is nice to that little girl. She mostly just felt lonely. Story 8. I had a friend when I was around 8 that I would always hang out with. She drove me up the wall because if we were in different rooms and I called out to her, she'd never answer. She would just walk into the room and then respond. I hated it because it would scare me when she'd silently pop up out of nowhere when I called out. Her whole family was like this too. I thought it was just a politeness thing because one of my aunts would always yell at me for shouting, "What?" if she called me from another room, but my aunt was only angry that I never said yes. So yeah, I thought my friend and her family were just weird. I asked my friend why she could never just simply answer me when I yelled for her. She'd always just shrug and say there's no real reason, and that's just how she rolls. I pointed out that her parents and siblings were the same, and she said they roll like that too. Okay, fine. Well, one day I was over there and her dad was at work, and her stay-at-home mom went to take one of her brothers to hockey practice and the younger ones to the doctor's office or something. She left us home because she didn't feel like carting around a bunch of kids, and she knew we wouldn't tear the house apart as the boys would. An hour after she left, my friend and I were upstairs together doing craft shit when I heard someone downstairs call her name. It happened twice and she didn't notice. I told her what I heard and we listened. After a while, we heard the voice faintly call to her. It sounded like it was coming from the garage. I was like, "Oh, your mom is back. Ask her what she wants." My friend just quietly got up and walked all the way downstairs instead of yelling back. I followed her but was pissed. Like, why are we walking all this way when simply yelling back would get us all the answers we need? We go into the garage and there's no one there. We checked the entire first floor and nothing. Doors and windows were all closed and locked still. I'm a bit weirded out and my friend nonchalantly grabs some ice cream from the fridge and we go and sit outside on the doorstep to eat it. I ask her WTF was that about, and she's like, "Yeah, so you asked me why we don't answer anyone calling from other rooms or outside, and this is why." She explained that in her culture, they believed that demons use the voices of your loved ones to try to lure you to hell or something. She said you're safe if you don't answer them, which is why her family would always come into the room to verify the person calling them was a person. Now I'm freaked out and don't want to go back inside at all until her mom would return. My friend was pretty unaffected by it all and said she's used to it. In my panic, I asked if the demons ever shapeshifted so that even if you see your loved one who called you, it wasn't them. She got quiet and thought about that, then got scared and started crying. She said she never thought of that before. We both ran to our other friend's house down the road and stayed there until her mom came home. Story 9. This happened 24 years ago. I was 16, and it was the middle of the night. It was summertime and hot, so I would sleep with my window cracked open, about 6 inches. Right outside my bedroom window was a chain link fence that separated the backyard from a separate backyard, both our property. There were planks of wood, 2x4s, an extra window, junk, all leaning up against both sides of that fence. Our house was a work in progress, and we always had extra pieces of wood around. Anyway, I'm sleeping, and it's probably 2 a.m., and I just opened my eyes. I don't know why I woke up, but I just opened my eyes like on command. I see that I am 4 inches away from the ceiling. I blink several times, thinking my eyes were just out of focus. No, I am that close to the ceiling. As soon as I make that realization, I feel myself get sucked back into bed. Startled and confused, I lay there, paralyzed in fear. Then I look to the corner of my room, towards the ceiling, and I see a swirling gray cloud. In an instant, I sense this gray cloud knows I am aware of its presence. It rushes over my bed, then shoots out the window. At that moment, the boards and wood leaning up against the fence outside my room explode. Not explode, but by some force, are thrown from both sides of the fence. The next morning, wood was all over both yards. I didn't know how to explain what has happened, so I helped pick up the wood and carried on. A strange thing is that I knew that it needed an open window to escape, and I knew it as soon as it flew out the window. I don't know how I knew that, but the window needed to be open. Many years later, I realized that I may have been having some kind of out-of-body experience, but that was the most real, unreal thing that has ever happened to me. Story 10. I have always had ghost encounters and weird things happen, but after my brother-in-law killed himself, I started having more stuff happening. I chalked it up to my being severely depressed and dissociating from grief. Weird things like my swinging door with a doorstopper kept slamming in my face as I walked up to it. A glass plate from my great-grandfather was propped on the window and would fall on the floor without breaking any time I walked through the room. I had a song for him, "I Drive Your Truck," that the electricity would start blinking when it played on the radio. I felt hands on my shoulder as I slumped through the house. 7 months later, I went into my parents' office to work. I would use their office to work remotely as a web designer when I was in town. Their employee came into my office at the end of the day and closed the door quietly. She was staring at me quietly and said, "I have something I need to talk to you about." I thought it was that she crashed the website or something. "I'm shaking writing this." She said, "As soon as you walked into the office today, I've seen a man following you around. I see spirits," and he figured out I could see him. "He hasn't left me alone all day, telling me I need to talk to you. He won't let me leave the office until I tell you what he has to say." At this point, I'm so shocked I was shaking. She said he has his head hanging down, and he has a gun in his hand. He says he's so sorry and to not worry about him, because he's at peace. He says he is the one slamming your doors and knocking a plate off the window. He's been trying to reach you, but you won't listen. He wants you to know that he sits with your kids at night when they can't sleep, and he's so sorry that he can't be their uncle anymore. He keeps saying a name that starts with D and putting his arm way up. Didn't know what that meant at the time, but later figured it was the name of his twin brother that was almost a foot taller than him, name starting with a D. Then she said he wants you to tell everyone that he's okay and he's sorry to put them through this. Not gonna lie, this kind of put me in a tailspin for a few months where I would talk to him out loud, hoping nobody heard me, knowing he was there listening. A week after this happened, I was cleaning up Christmas stuff and packing up boxes. Depression is a bitch and makes you not want to clean up for months, lol. I had all the boxes packed and said to myself, well, I guess that's it. Right when I said that, there was a crash in the kitchen. Go in, see a Christmas picture I hung up for the season crashed and broken on the floor after it fell off the wall. Said, "Thanks, bro," and packed it up even though it was broken. 5 years later, if I'm driving in my car and that song comes on the radio, the electric system in the car still goes haywire and I can feel him sitting in the passenger seat while I drive. Story 11. This is something I've never been able to rationalize. For months after my dad died, we were getting landline calls where no one would answer on the other end. This was in 2002. So, while robocallers were a thing, it wasn't as prevalent as it is today, but we did assume they were probably wrong numbers or something. We didn't have any phones that displayed caller ID at the time. Well, one time, after getting yet another call with only silence on the other end, I jokingly said, "Dad, if that's you, call my cell phone." I want to preface this by saying I rarely ever got calls on my cell phone, and never spam calls in those days. I was 18 with an unlisted number that only my family and a few friends had. Just a few minutes later, my phone rang with a number I'd never seen before. With what I'd just said freshly in my mind, I kind of freaked out and didn't answer. I was on my way out to go somewhere with my mom, so when we got in the car, I told her what happened. We decided to call the number back. It never rang, but there was activity at the other end. Muffled static and the sound of numbers being dialed slowly. It was the weirdest thing. Both my mom and I said hello, but no one ever answered. Has anyone ever had something like that happen to them when dialing a number? I've never had it happen before or since.
The end. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.